Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 5 of our 6-part Dominaria Limited Set review, where today we're going to look at all of the green cards as well as the rest of the multicolor cards in the set. If you've been watching this series, you kind of know what to expect here. We're going to talk about green as a whole, what it's trying to do in the limited environment. We'll discuss its interactions with the other colors, and then we'll look at each card individually to talk overall power level as well as where they fit in best. Now quickly before we get started, just a really fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support what we do here at the channel. Our Patreon page is listed below. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon. If you make any purchases on Amazon, no matter what it is actually, once you go through that initial link, we'll get a small percentage. And then finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. And hopefully you can save some cash while you support us here at the channel. And as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to all the viewers. You all make the channel what it is. So thank you, and let's get into it. All right, let's begin by talking about what green's trying to do generally. You're going to find some ramp in the color. You're also going to find a little bit of lands matters, ways to push land out, and sometimes even lands from the graveyard impacting certain cards. You'll see that as we go throughout the review today. You're also going to find some light tribal elements with fungi and sapperlings, which are kind of the go wide portion of green. But of course, you will also have your large creatures you can ramp into. Another thing you're going to find here is a focus on kicker. Kicker spread throughout this set, however, there is a focus on it in green, which makes sense with the ramp compatibility there. Now, let's talk about how green interacts with the other colors. And of course, this is vital to know if you're drafting. But even in sealed to your pre-release, it's good to know these synergies so you can look for opportunities in your sealed pool. So let's begin with green and white. Selesnya colors, they're all about creatures and board presence. That's not really different. They can go wide again with a lot of these sapperling tokens, and especially some of the small white creatures. And then they can build up to some larger things thanks to the ramp in green as the game goes on. But definitely board presence will be the name of the game here. Now, green and blue, this one's actually kind of interesting to me because one of the pitfalls when you go all in on a ramp deck, whether it's actually constructed magic or limited magic, is they do have high variance. Sometimes you draw all of your ramp spells and your creatures that create mana and all of those things, and you don't get your targets, or vice versa, and that can be a problem for you. Well, one of the best ways to get around that is by making your deck a little more consistent through card selection and card draw. Well, blue is going to be the perfect support color just for that alone. Lots of card selection, a lot of card draw, and you can see by the example on the screen here that being able to play lands and having this light land matters theme could allow you to speed through your deck a little faster and hopefully hit your targets. Golgari colors. Well, one of the big pieces of Golgari is the synergies with the sapperling tokens. You will find sapperling tribal synergies in both colors, like you see in the example on the screen here. But even aside from that, having fodder to sacrifice to some of the black cards that do have a sacrifice for benefit theme going on can be very good too. Then finally, Gruul colors. There is a strong focus this time on kicker. Red is the other color where kicker is very, very strong. And again, you still have that ramp, stompy feel going on and some light synergies, really light synergies between elves too. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the individual cards. Adventureous Impulse. Alright, this is one of my favorite cards of the set, actually. I love simple cards like this that let you get consistency. This is cheap, it only costs 1, it's good on turn 1, it's good on turn 21. Limited decks are going to consist heavily of creatures and lands. This is going to let you hopefully draw heat when you need to draw heat later in the game. Or if you just simply need to get your lands out or fix colors early in the game, you got that opportunity too to maybe work out. So yeah, this is awesome. I'm happy to run 1, maybe even 2 of these on a lot of builds. It's that common, so you'll be able to pick them up. Ancient Animus. Alright, this is a good card if you have a legendary creature in play. It's actually a great card. Not so exciting if you don't. However, I don't think it's really a consideration because for the most part, most pools are going to be fine running this, especially if you're drafting. If you're playing sealed, it might get a little sketchy at times, but I think you're going to be okay 99% of the time, just because you're going to have a legendary slot in each pack. So I don't think you'll have a lack of targets in this environment. It feels like it's going to be okay. Now, if you don't, and you end up just putting a +1/+1 counter on target creature at instant speed, it can be an okay combat trick for 2. Nothing super exciting, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But you really want to fight with a legendary creature here for 2 mana at instant speed. That will be phenomenal. Arbor Armament. Well, that's not easy to say. Okay. Now, every set feels like it has this like instant, like green flying gotcha card. This is kind of the one here. Only costs 1, it's real cheap, instant speed, and you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it will gain reach till end of turn. So what you're trying to do here is bait your opponent into attacking with the flyer, and then buffing one of your creatures, giving it reach, and just have that gotcha moment. It's alright as long as you know your opponent's running flyers. I'm not going to start this in my deck, I will probably just sideboard it in the event that I need it. Mammoth Gorger. Alright, this is a fantastic card because its core stats are phenomenal in this set. 4/4 for 4, even though it has no evasion or anything, sign me up. I like the power level here and the economy behind this card. And there's more, it has a kicker attached to it. Now, first off, imagine if you can ramp into this a little bit, get it out on turn 3 even from time to time, that'd be phenomenal. But even if you don't, a 4/4 on turn 4 is going to be really good for you. Now, the kicker's there in case you do draw it later, it gives you an option to make it a little larger, and that's fine, and I'm glad it's there, it's better than having it not there. But I'm also maybe slightly underwhelmed because the creature doesn't have evasion, and a 4/4 on turn 4 or 5 actually feels pretty good to me, whereas 7/7 on turn 8 or 9 feels a little underwhelming. But again, it's just extra, so who cares? I'm not going to complain about it. But the main reason I'm playing this card and playing it rather consistently is the 4/4 for 4 stats. Broken Bond. This is a good story card, actually, and aside from that, it's a maybe good card for you. The problem is it's a little clunky. Now, I like the idea I might be able to cheat a land into play in addition to the one that I've already played for the turn. That's awesome. Problem being is I have to destroy an artifact or enchantment to have that happen. Now, that's where the timing for this card feels a little wonky to me, because if my opponent does play a good artifact or enchantment, will it be that early in the game where I'll have the extra land in play and that ability will actually matter? And if it's a little later in the game and I can still do it, probably means I was flooded anyway. But if it's in the portion of the game that's really early, odds are I might not have a target for this. So that's kind of weird. I'm not really getting what I want out of it when it comes to powering the lands out. But I am able to perhaps deal with a problematic artifact or enchantment later in the game. So where does this sit for me? I'm not going to run this as a way to power out lands like in my main deck. I'm not going to fault anybody for main decking this, though, especially if they're on a ramp plan, because there are some good artifacts and enchantments in the set. We've been seeing great sagas all week. Tomorrow we're going to look at all the artifacts, and there's some good ones. So I think you will find a target for this. Now, if you decide to leave it in your sideboard, then of course bring it in when you know there's going to be targets after you play game 1. But as a whole, don't count on this to be like a ramp lands matter style card, because I just think it's too inconsistent for that. Think of it more as artifacts or enchantment removal and you'll be happier. If you wanted to try to go deep and exploit this card, you could also put cheap artifacts or enchantments in your deck and just target those early in the game, but that starts to feel a little too high variance for me. Although there are some sagas you play that you might want to destroy before they tick up, so just a out of the ordinary interaction you might want to file away. Corrosive Ooze. This is a fantastic card. Now tomorrow we're going to look at some equipment. There's some good ones actually in the set. But what's awesome about this card is you don't need to use this as like a sideboard card once you see the equipment, because it's a 2/2 for 2 with upside. And I know I say this every video, but 2/2s for 2, even if I don't use the abilities on them, are good curve fillers. They're an important part of your limited deck. So I can just run this, and if my opponent happens to have equipment, well, wonderful. And if they don't, well, okay, I still got a 2/2 for 2. Now, if you didn't main deck this for some reason, obviously don't forget it's in your sideboard if you do see problematic equipment, but this is very main deckable. Elfame Druid. This is our first mana-producing creature of the day, and there'll be more coming, trust me. This one is great for limited. Granted, 0/2 for 2. It's not a 2/2 for 2, but it brings you what you want to do if you're trying to ramp in green, right? And you can tap it for green mana. That's great. Also, you can tap it for 2 green mana, but you can only spend that to cast kick spells. Green's got a lot of kicker in it. This might be best with Gruul colors, perhaps, because red also has a lot of kicker. But there's kicker throughout the sets, and there's plenty of it in green, so you'll be able to exploit that probably no matter what color you're running at some point. But really, you're playing this because you're just trying to power out some mid-range to larger things quicker and get ahead of curve. It'll be great for you there. This can be a high draft pick in a pack easily, maybe even first pickable sometimes. It is also an elf, and there's not really strong elf synergies, but there is one card that does have some elf synergies. We're going to see it in a little bit. So as we go through these cards, just don't forget that when we're looking at elves. Fungal Plots. Okay, I know I typically say I don't like enchantments and enter the battlefield, don't do anything on their own, yada yada yada, but this is an exception for me because first off, it's cheap. I feel like I can sneak this into play. and I feel like the upside is very strong on this. Now, let's talk about Faerie Magic first, and we'll talk about some of the synergies you could find with this card. If you're just playing a regular game of Magic and you don't have things that go along with this necessarily, it's still good. Your creatures will die throughout the game, and then later on you can exile them for some Saproling tokens, which in turn you can maybe chump block with, sacrifice to gain some life, which is good against aggro, or draw a card, which is always good, but especially good if you're trying to get ramp pieces together, for example. So this is just strong, playing green on its own. There's also Saproling strategies just within green too. Now, what if you're in black and green, for example? There's a lot more you might be able to do with this. Green does have the aristocrat style ability going on where it's trying to sacrifice for benefit. And if you sacrifice your creatures and then later use those creatures in the graveyard to turn them into Saprolings, now you have more things to sacrifice and a lot of things you could do with them. There are also black and green Saproling fungi synergies. Maybe you're in blue. You're milling yourself to try to get lands in your graveyard. There's some synergies we'll see there in a few moments. And you hit some creatures. Well, now those creatures are not just sitting there. You can actually do something with them. This is a really good card. Again, whether you have the synergies to exploit or you're just playing Magic, I would run one of these. Gaia's Blessing. Interesting reprint here. Now, we talked about the other day when we looked at blue that maybe you could draft a mill deck and try to mill out your opponent, but it doesn't feel really realistic to me because there's not enough mill cards and they're all kind of expensive, I think. So that probably won't work. If you come up against an opponent trying to do that, side this in and they're going to have some problems. Now, if you draw this card, it's not going to be great for you, but if they mill it from the library into the graveyard directly, then you're going to get to reshuffle and they're probably in a lot of trouble. Now, aside from that, you might want to use this against somebody who's going to the graveyard a little too often. So in game one, if they have ways to bring things back from the graveyard to their hand or reanimation, or they're putting lands in the graveyard for benefit, then you have this to kind of put a damper on that plan a little bit. And it also cantrips only cost 2, so it's not a big commitment on your part. Also, too, if you're running like board sweeps or something, being able to reshuffle some of your own cards in sometimes isn't the worst thing in the world either, to try to hit them again or reshuffle your removal spells back in if you use them early, things of that nature. Although, most of the time, I don't think you're going to have room for that in the main deck just right out of the gate, but there are good reasons to sideboard this in. Gaia's Protector. Not a big fan of this one. 4-2 for 4. It's going to trade down a high percentage of the time. I just don't like that. The whole idea that it must be blocked is interesting, but your opponent decides what blocks it, so it's not like you can say, I want that creature to block it. Also, too, your opponent can sometimes tap creatures if they have abilities, even if they only had one creature in play and they didn't want to block it. There's a lot of ways around that, usually. Every once in a while, they'll be stuck with no creatures on the battlefield, and whatever they put down is basically going to die, sure, but it's usually going to trade also. So, yeah, don't touch this one. There's a lot better things you could be doing in this set and in this color for 4. Gift of Growth. Good combat trick here, and you got to remember in green, you're not going to see a lot of pinpoint removal or direct damage. So these combat tricks that relate with your creatures or fight mechanics, they are kind of your green removal, and in a pinch, sometimes they do the same thing. I maybe would prefer just regular flat removal some of the time, but you'll be surprised how often these work just as well. And sometimes if you're ahead and you're trying to close out a game, the ones that buff your creatures can sometimes also power out some extra damage. Nothing wrong with that. Now, with that being said, this one is a good one. I mean, 2 casting costs, it's cheap, it's instant. I like that it untaps the creature and gives a +2/+2 here because you can have your creatures tap down and bait your opponent into a trap. And then also, if you pay the kicker, which is also very reasonable, with the kicker it's a green and 3, the creature instead will get +4/+4 and untap. So, really good combat trick here. I can see myself running one of these. Grow from the Ashes. Okay, this is a good way to fix color, first and foremost for me. So if I'm splashing a third or getting a little greedier, I'm going to run this in my deck, and if I play it for 3, I get to search for a basic land, put it into the battlefield untapped. That's actually kind of cool, but it is 3 at sorcery speed, so I feel like they kind of owe you that. And the kicker, which starts to get a little expensive, green and 4, lets you actually grab 2 basic lands, and they'll come into the battlefield untapped. So, okay, that's fine. The funny thing is, if I'm not trying to color fix, there actually might be more efficient ways in this set that you'll have to ramp. This is a fine ramp card, don't get me wrong. A lot of times you'll run it, you'll be happy with it. But it's not the most economical one that we're going to look at today, and you might not have room for it, as a matter of fact, which is kind of crazy to think. But for me, this feels more in tune to color fixing. Grun the Lonely King. Aw, Grun. Okay, so this is a bomb in Limited. I don't have a lot to say about it, other than 6 casting cost, maybe you get it in a little bit early if you're lucky with a ramp. It's a 5/5 creature, it has very substantial stats, and when you attack in with it, it's a 10/10. Oh, and if you have some extra mana and you can kick it for 3 additional, well, wonderful. It gets the 5+1/+1 counters, and now you have a 10/10 that's attacking in as a 20/20. Does have to attack alone, though, to get the buff, which, I don't know, sometimes might be a little awkward, but for the most part, who cares? You're attacking with a 10/10 or a 20/20. Now, your opponent needs an answer for this, or they're in trouble. It doesn't have evasion. They can chump block it for a while, but eventually that's going to catch up with them. You can't do that forever, and as long as they're not like beating you down in the air or something, you're going to eventually take over the game. Now, if you can give this trample or evasion or something, well, even better, and there's a lot of ways to do that, obviously, in the set. This is first pickable, really strong uncommon here, and sometimes your opponent is just going to have no answer to something like this. Kamals Riddick Vow. Here's our legendary sorcery in green. This is our last one, actually. This is our 6th one we've looked at this week. And the big drawback for all of these is you can't play them unless you have a legendary creature or planeswalker in play. And I've been saying all week, I don't think that's going to be a big issue. I mentioned it earlier in the video. So I feel like this is still playable a high percentage of the time, even in sealed. I mean, if you don't feel like you have enough legendary creatures and or planeswalkers, I guess, not that you'll see a lot of those, then okay, skip it. But as long as you feel like there's a fair chance you have a casting this, I'd say go for it, especially with some ramp behind it, because this card is insane. I mean, being able to pay the 2 green and X, look at the top X cards of your library, you get to put any number of lands, first and foremost, into the battlefield untapped. That's great. Then also legendary permanents, not just creatures, but permanents. They're going to go right into play if they cost X or less. And then anything you don't get to put in play goes in your graveyard, which again, we know there's graveyard synergies. Black might be able to bring some of those back to your hands or perhaps even into the battlefield later. So that's kind of insane, right? Now, the startup cost is definitely an issue you have to be concerned with, but if you can pull this off, you're probably going to be well ahead in this game. Corrosive Druid. This is a good creature, actually. It costs 3 for a 2/3. I mean, those stats aren't super impressive, but they're okay. And then when you look at that kicker, now it's kind of funny because typically I'm not a big fan of life gain for the sake of life gain, but when you start talking 10 life, I start to pay attention. And yeah, it's a little expensive. Now you're paying 2 green and 6, but getting a 2/3 creature and gaining 10 life is actually kind of a big chunk of life. I mean, it's a half of your life total to begin with in a normal game of Limited. So, you know, I have to pay attention to this. Nice late game play, maybe you can ramp it out, get it out slightly earlier, but this is all about the life gain. This could be backbreaking against an aggressive build for sure, so if you're not main decking it, bring it in if you come up against an aggressive deck. Lanois Elves, alright, here we go. The best mana dork ever, right? I mean, this card is phenomenal. Now, this is first pickable common in a lot of packs. This is going to be a card that is going to be well, I'm not going to say floating around drafts because it's going to get picked up really quick. And that's the downside, I think, of green. There's a few cards in here that I want to like slam first pick, and I almost feel like, especially if they're at lower rarities, that maybe more than one person at the table might be doing it, and it could be a trap. But at the same time, I mean, how are you going to not pick this, right? Like, this card is incredible. It just puts you ahead of curve, which is super powerful all the time in Magic, much less in Limited. And there's just so many good creatures, even mid-range creatures in green that you could play and get out earlier with this thing and just steal a game. Yeah, play these whenever you get a chance. Even in multiples, they're going to be good for you. Fantastic reprint here. And it's also an elf, which we're going to look at another elf that it does work with in a few moments. Lanois Ren Boy. Okay, when this card was previewed, I joked around that the Magic player in me who loves value was getting physically ill looking at this card because this is the anti-value card of the set. First off, it's a 3/2 for 3. It's going to trade down most of the time. I don't like that. Secondly, you have to pay 2 mana to get 1. What is happening here? So there is a reason to play it, rest assured. And that is if you're trying to maybe splash a color and this is your best option in your pool, or you're just trying to get greedier with colors, there is a reason that that filter might actually help you out from time to time. If you're not in that situation, though, don't run this thing. It is an elf, and we're going to again see a card in a second where that's going to matter with, but I don't think it's even that important, so there's a lot of other better elves you could be playing in this set. So, yeah, most of the time you skip this card, except for that one situation I mentioned. Noir Scout, here's another elf. This is a 1/3 for 2, and it has a weird ability, though, although I'm glad it's a 1/3 for 2, because at least it doesn't make me feel like this is a dead ability if I don't have an extra land in my hand. But again, it's a way to power out lands. So it works good with card draw, probably. I feel like all of these spells where you can power out the extra land, probably a little better in blue and green because you might be drawing into more lands. But at the same time, there's a point where you're kind of like, either I don't have a land to actually utilize the ability, or an extra land, because you're still playing your one land for the turn. Or if I do, like at that point, is it overkill anyway, and I could have been playing something else that maybe could have allowed me to put something with larger board presence out. So this card feels a tad awkward to me, but if you're all in on the land plan and the ramping, and this is what you have, it's playable, but you might have better options some of the time. Mammoth Spider. Now, this is a big reach creature that's going to protect you against a lot of things. I mean, this puts the brakes on a 4/4 flyer. That's saying something. It's going to cost you 5, but 3/5 reach, yeah, I'll play one of these and be happy with it. If you don't for some reason, remember it's in your sideboard in case you do come up against some flyers. But I think this is still very playable. I mean, even attacking in with a 3/5, if you do have the opportunity to get a little more aggressive, is not the worst thing in the world. Marwyn the Nurturer. Okay, this is the card I've been alluding to for a while now, and this is the only card that really interacts with other elves, but I don't know, it's kind of interesting that they didn't go a little deeper with this. And this is a rare, you're not even going to see it all that often. So, is it any good though, even on its own? Well, it's super fragile. I don't like that. I don't like a 1/1 for 3, not at all. But at least the other elves are relatively cheap. There's some 1-drop and 2-drop elves. Maybe you could even play one on the same turn you cast this. It does lead to more ramp. I mean, even if it's a 1/1, it taps for 1 green. If it's a 2/2, it'll tap for 2 green and so on. And it does get bigger when you throw elves on the battlefield, as long as this is in place. So, yeah, I mean, it's okay. I don't know if I would always run this, though. I'll be honest. I'm a little worried about the fragility. But if I had a lot of elves to support it, and I was really all about the ramp, and maybe I had limited ramp options in my pool, yeah, it'll be fine. The Mending of Dominaria. I really like this saga. It's really strong. It costs 5, but look at that 1 and 2. Put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So it doesn't have to be one of the 2 you put in necessarily. It could be something that was already there. That's actually sweet. So for 5, you get to do that once. Even if something happens to the saga and I just do that, I don't hate that. And if I can do it again, I really don't hate that. Now that number 3, return all land cards from your graveyard to your hand, then shuffle your graveyard into your library. Sometimes you might not want to shuffle your graveyard into your library, especially if you're in Golgari colors, but I'm not too worried about that, because if I have been throwing lands in my graveyard throughout the game, and maybe that's through mill or other ways, then I have this way to bring them all back, and they come back untapped. That's kind of sweet, so I do like that a lot, and it's not just basic lands either. So, where do I play this card? I would actually play it anytime for value. I think it's a good value card, just regardless. Better probably in the Simic deck, again, where you might be self-milling a little bit. Better in the Golgari deck, where you may have some good creatures in your graveyard that you've sacrificed earlier in the game. You can bring them back, regain board presence, maybe sacrifice again. I do like all of those strategies. Even though with Golgari, it might be a nombo sometimes when you're reshuffling your graveyard. But I think you can mitigate that a lot of the time. So overall, just a really strong saga here. Multani Yavamaya's Avatar. This is a mythic, you're not going to see it a whole lot, but this is one of the payoffs that is out there for pushing out lands quickly or letting lands go to your graveyard. It gets power toughness based on lands you control and the number of lands in your graveyard. So that's actually kind of awesome considering it has reach and trample also. And there's recursion built in. If you pay a green and 1, return 2 lands you control to your hands, and you get this from the graveyard back to your hands. Okay, that's kind of awesome because, again, that way if you milled it or you had to sacrifice it at some point, or you put it into your graveyard looking for perhaps a reanimation opportunity that never comes, you still can maybe later bring it back to your hand and then cast it for real. So, or if you had to discard it, for example, there's still value there. There's just a lot going on here, as there should be. It's a mythic card, it costs 6, like this should be a good card, and it really, really is. This is first pickable most of the time. This is a fantastic card if you can get a hold of it. Nature's Spiral. This is a reprint. This thing's always good. You know, it's sorcery speed, sure, but it only costs 2. Target permanent from graveyard to hand. Very versatile. You can get back removal spell. You can get back a creature maybe that you sacrificed. You can get back something that was milled into there. It's almost like slight card selection, because granted, it's only out of what's in your graveyard, which you can manipulate a little bit in this set as to how many cards end up in your graveyard. But it's not quite a tutor, but there's going to be times, especially later in the game, that almost feels like a tutor. This is a really strong card to run like one of in your decks. Pierce the Sky. This one's kind of interesting. It feels very Plummet-esque, right? 2 casting cost instant. It's not a destroy spell, though, but it almost pretty much is going to deal with any problem you might have in the sky. 7 damage to target creature with flying. So I don't main deck this typically, but I'll bring this in against flyers, no doubt. Primordial Worm. I'm not really excited about this one. It's a board presence, big dumb creature. Sometimes you can give these trample or evasion, and that could be fine for you. I usually don't play this unless I'm just really cornered into finding something with substance at the higher casting cost spot. Maybe my seal pool is really shallow. I'll play it then, but I won't be happy about it. I really want to play creatures with abilities, and this is just a little underwhelming for me. Saproling Migration. Okay, we're going to start getting into some of the Saproling cards now, and this is a good one. 2 casting costs to get 2 Saproling tokens, so you're paying 2, but you're getting 2/2 power toughness on the board. Very similar to a 2-drop 2/2, which you know I love. So this will be good for you, and there's a lot of things you can do with these tokens. There's going to be synergies we'll be looking at in a few moments. There are some synergies in black. Of course, the sacrifice for benefit stuff's going on in black as well. Or you could just go wide if you're going Selesnya or you're going Gruul. Now, if you have a green at 5 available, you can pay the kicker and get 4 tokens. The economy is not as strong, but again, it is a bonus, and I won't complain about it. There's opportunities to do that and power out your team every once in a while. So yeah, this card is going to come in handy in a lot of builds, and it's also good just on its own. Song of Affray Lease. Okay, this is another good saga. It costs you 2, and I like the 1 and 2. Maybe I don't always play this on turn 2 if I really want to exploit that, especially if I'm trying to ramp. But if I do, I mean, the 3rd turn, I will get the number 2, which is the same as number 1. And I'll also have the 2 mana I used to cast this originally back, so that's pretty awesome. So there are times it will be fine as an early play. Other times you want to hold on to it to try to get a bigger play. It's a good color fixer too if you're trying to splash or get greedy. Also notice the 1 and 2 ability is effective until next turn. So it will allow you to play some instants on your opponent's turn too. And that number 3 is awesome if you're going wide especially. So if I have a situation where I just need to do one big attack, maybe I'm in Selesnya colors, maybe I'm in Gruul colors, I have a lot of Saproling tokens, a lot of small creatures, some goblins, something like that. Or that trample could allow some big creatures to connect with their damage. This could even be game-ending at times. Now the card has to stick around a little while to get to that 3, although we did see that creature yesterday, the 2/2 red creature, that when it attacks you add a lore counter to a saga. If you could expedite getting to number 3 with 1 or 2 of those, that could be a huge play out of nowhere for 2 mana if everything lined up right. Maybe I'm going to Magical Christmas Land there. Spore Swarm. I actually really like this card. 4 casting cost, 3 power, 3 toughness on the battlefield. Very on par for things going on in this set. That's just fine. I like the fact that it comes in the form of Saproling tokens. There are synergies. We're going to see more as we go forward here, but also not only within green, but green-black. Beyond that, this is a combat trick. So I can really get an opponent. If they attack him like a 3/3 creature, I can just play this and block it with my tokens. Wonderful. Not to mention all the other things we've been talking about all day, like sacrifice for benefit and such. So there's just a lot happening here in this card, and it gives you a lot of directions you can go. I like it a lot. Spore Crown Thallid. Well, here we go. Finally, the payoff for messing around with these Saprolings, right? It's just 2 casting costs. It's really cheap. 2/2 with tons of upside. In this case, other fungi and Saprolings getting +1/+1. So this is good in green. It's going to be best in green and black, where you do have other opportunities to make Saprolings from time to time, as well as other fungi. So you might even be able to go a little tribal if you draft into this. That could be a lot of fun, actually. So there's a lot of payouts for this card. Although, again, this is another one of those cards I think if someone opens it and really wants to go tribal with Saprolings, they may first pick it, and it's uncommon. There could be a couple of those at your table, even in the first pack, and if you draft one, someone else drafts one, someone will have to jump out of that, or else you're both going to have some pretty mediocre decks. That could be a problem. So just remember that when it comes to draft. But yeah, a lot of value to be had here for sure. Steelleaf Champion. Okay, maybe the best of the 3 on-color spells that we're looking at this week. And perhaps it's because of the fact that you have things like Llanowar Elves in the color. But this thing is a powerhouse. 3 casting cost. It's all green, but 5/4. And also it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. This is a strong elf right here. So I love the fact that you can't kind of joint block it with a couple 2/2s. Like your opponent's going to need to grab like a couple 3/2s or a 3/2 and a 3/3 or something to be able to really deal with this in combat effectively. If they can't get that to happen for them, and this is backed up with some removal or something, this card could run away with the game quickly. Imagine playing Llanowar Elf on turn 1 and playing this on turn 2. Like, what is your opponent going to do about that? They might not be able to do anything about that, quite honestly, other than lose the game. This is super sweet. Obviously, this has a lot of constructed playability written all over it. This will see standard play, I have no doubt. But in Limited, if you're lucky enough to get this rare, you're going to be having a real good day. Even if you end up playing it on turn 3 or turn 4 even, this thing is still powerful. Fantastic card here. If you're only splashing green, okay, maybe you can't swing it, but for the most part, if you can afford that casting cost, go all in on this. Silvan Awakening. Here's another way to contribute to maybe that go wide strategy a little bit if you're trying to find more creatures to just power out a big victory. Or you could just try to close out a game generally with this because you know you're going to have a lot of lands, especially in a long drawn out game. So for just 3 mana, you're able to, at least until the end of the next turn, make all your lands 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, and haste. So you can get a huge attack in potentially. Or you could use this defensively in a pinch too to buy yourself more time because it is until your next turn. So your opponent's following turn, if they were going to finish you off, now you have this wall of indestructible lands with reach in front of you. So that does buy you maybe another turn or something along those lines. So very good card. Maybe you could argue it works better with some of the go wide strategies because there are ways to pump your stuff anyway with those strategies. We just saw one a few moments ago, as a matter of fact, and we'll see more. So sure, Selesnya colors, Gruul colors, maybe this gets a little bit better, but ultimately I think this can be good in any build. Territorial Allosaurus. It's a dinosaur. I love seeing the dinosaur creature type now. So this is very economical, a 5/5 for 4. I was just saying a 4/4 for 4 is amazing. And now here we are with a 5/5 for 4. Well, this one's a rare. It's going to be harder to find. But if you find it, play it. And you know what? If you can pay the kicker, it does get a little expensive at that point. 3 green and 4. But also being able to fight something when it enters the battlefield. So maybe getting some removal out of it as well later in the game. That could be huge. Taking out one of their good creatures and putting out a 5/5 that could be very swingy in a board stall. And yeah, 3 on color. It's a little expensive. But you know what? We're in green. So there's a lot of ways to get there. Thorn Elemental. Good reprint here. I actually like this card a lot in this set because, first off, it's just doing a lot as a 7/7, 4/7. Those are powerful stats. And in this particular environment, I don't think this is going to be an issue for you because, of course, you have ramp. But even if for some reason you couldn't ramp into this and you had to hardcast it at 7, I don't think it's a problem because this is a powerful set. But I do feel like it's going to be a little bit slow, a little bit grindy from what we're seeing. So hardcasting this is definitely not out of the question. And then if your opponent can't get rid of it, they're taking some serious damage. Like, you can't chump block this to any effect because you can do it, but they're still taking the damage, which is insane considering it's 7. So this is one of those cards that if your opponent doesn't have a good answer quick, you could perhaps close out a game with it. So yeah, I'll run one of these and be happy with it in probably most green builds. Untamed Kabu. Here's another really spiky card. I like this one a lot. 2/2 for 2 with tons of upside. Vigilance, Trample. This is right in my wheelhouse, right? So you're going to play this, and if you can't kick it, it's still a really solid card. The Vigilance. It has Trample, so if you were to buff it later, that could be relevant. And then if you can kick it, which is very reasonable, a green and 4. Now it comes in with 3+1/+1 counters, making it a 5/5 with Vigilance, Trample. Yeah, sign me up. This is our first pickable uncommon. This thing is a beast. You're going to be really happy with it. If you're lucky enough to grab 2 because these are uncommon, I would play as many as I can get my hands on, quite honestly. This card is awesome. Verdant Force, another reprint of a large creature. Now, this one costs 8 total, and it is 3 on color. It gets a little bit harder to cast. It's a 7/7, but the payout here is the beginning of each upkeep, not just your upkeep, but that's all upkeeps. You get a green Saberling token. So it plays into the whole Saberling tribal, or maybe give you fodder for some sacrifice, things of that nature. You could argue maybe this is a little bit better in black because you also might be able to reanimate it. This is a classic reanimation target, actually. Back in the old days, before we had Grizzlebrands and all that type of stuff, a lot of people would just reanimate this. It was good enough, believe it or not. So, you know what? In Limited, that would be great if you pull it off. And again, hardcasting this, not out of the question either. Wild Onslaught, another great payoff for going wide. So Selesnya, Gruul, pay attention to this one. If you have a lot of goblins, saberlings, a lot of small knights, whatever you got going on, this is going to be awesome for you. Because if you just pay the regular cost, it's at instant speed. It's kind of a combat trick. It could close out the game. In a pinch, it can be defensive, but you don't want to be defensive with this. You want to end games with this. And if you kick it, it gets a little expensive, green and 7, but then instead of each creature getting 1+1/+1 counter, they all get 2. That is kind of insane. That should definitely close out a game. So, Yeah, this thing is perfect for those style of decks. And it's okay as a combat trick too in a pinch if you don't have anything better. What's kind of nice about this is even if you only had a couple of creatures, the counters do stay, so it's not like your regular combat tricks that only last till end of turn. Yevamaya Sapherd. Okay, this is actually very economical. I love this a lot. Now, I've been complaining all week about these 3/2s that cost 3 and all that stuff. Here's a 2/2 that costs 3. However, when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 Sapperling token, so you're actually getting 3/3 power and toughness on the battlefield for 3. And I am great with that. That's actually great economy. So I'll be happy to play this. One of the better 3-drops I've seen all week, as a matter of fact. I feel like a lot of the 3-drops in this set have been a little underwhelming. This is a really good one. It is a fungus as well, which sometimes will definitely be important. And aside from that, just creating the extra creature does give you even just this and the other creature 2 things to sacrifice. If you are in the Golgari colors, that could be good for you. Sapperling, obviously, we've been seeing synergies with those tribally. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. Let's move on to multicolor with a Selesnya card, Shanna Sisay's Legacy. Now, this is exactly what you want from Selesnya. We've been talking about it all day. Go wide, Sapperlings, Knights, whatever, just a lot of small creatures. If you're playing a plan like that, this card gets to be pretty awesome. Now, read the fine print, though. It can't be the target of abilities your opponents control, but it can be targeted by their spells, so just keep that in mind. This isn't a turn 2 play for me, maybe not even a turn 3 or turn 4 play. I want to play this when it's going to be big enough to survive, especially if you have a lot of like direct damage across the table or something. So I probably want this to at least be a 4/4. Now it does count itself. It gets +1/+1 for each creature. So it would come in as a 1/1. However, you don't really want to do that. What you'd like is at least maybe 3 other creatures in play. A 4/4 feels a lot more stable to me. And then it will probably survive and hopefully be able to get bigger and be an obstacle for your opponent. So overall, great card if you're on that plan. If you don't have a lot of creatures, obviously, in your deck for some reason, and if you're in Selesnya colors, I don't know what you're doing, well, then skip it. But for the most part, this is going to be great for you. All right, our last card of the day, Techova Benthic Druid. I love this card. I mentioned it at the top of the show. This costs 5 for 3/3, and that is a little slow maybe, but once this thing comes out, you're probably just going to win the game if your opponent can't handle it. You'll just bury them in card advantage and life gain, if nothing else, because lands are a key part of limited play. You're going to be playing lands many, many times, and every time you do, drawing a card and gaining a life is huge. You're going to work through your deck quickly, find more lands, which are going to in turn turn into life and more card draw. Also, don't forget we saw some cards today that let you put multiple lands in play at times. This is a great combo with those cards. Perfect in these colors too, because like I said at the top of the show, sometimes ramp just can't smooth out, and you have a lot of trouble getting what you need when you need it. Granted, this is 5, so you can't have a horrible start to get here, but even if you have a decent start, this can really kind of get you the rest of the way. Blue's a perfect support for ramp with card selection and card draw, and that's what this card is all about. But even if you're not on that plan, this card is just simply powerful. Even if you're splashing one of these 2 colors, easily first pickable, pack 1, pick 1, even though I shy away a lot of times from dual color cards as the first pick, because sometimes if you can't stay in those colors once you start seeing the other packs coming around, then you end up giving up your first pick, which is not always a good thing. But a card this powerful, I'm taking the risk. If I have to splash, I have to splash. Whatever I got to do, I'm going to try to make this happen because it's phenomenal. All right, with that being said, we got through the green cards and all the multicolor cards now. We have one more part to go. It's going to be all of the colorless cards. That includes Karn, the artifacts, the lands. We'll be doing that tomorrow. The next day, we will do our pre-release primer. So those are really geared for newer players. Maybe if you never went to a pre-release before, lets you know what to expect and what you should bring, that type of stuff. And then later in the week, we are going to do a special edition of the Market Watch talking about Dominaria. So this weekend at the pre-release, you kind of know if you open anything that has some value, even though values will change dramatically. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And of course, Saturday, we'll do our regular Market Watch as well. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe. Have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.